So, welcome to Izaka Square Tables, organized by Izaka and hosted by Izaka and Nuria. My name is Ramzi Masri. I'm going to be your host for tonight, along with my colleague Nico Van Rooyen. Today, the Izaka Square Table is with the title Speaking Cybersecurity to the Board. I would like to share with you a little bit of housekeeping rules before we start. Once you join, please mute your microphone and stop sharing your video camera. Also, if you continue sharing your camera, unfortunately, we will be forced to remove you from the webinar if you don't unmute your microphone, if you unmute your microphone without using the proper process, which is raising your hand and being given the unmute. We will also be forced to, unfortunately, remove you from the webinar. For the reasons of the CPEs, we want to make sure that the name you used on Teams is the same name, first name, last name that you used when registering to the webinar, and they are the same on your Izaka profile, so you can use the CPEs later on. For tonight's presentation, it will be recorded and the slides will be shared later on. The recording will be on our YouTube channel a couple of days later, and the slides will be there. I want to have one more quick announcement before we go to our speaker. Basically, for the certified emerging technologies and also the ITCA certifications, you will be getting very soon a notification from the Izaka Netherlands chapter that Izaka Global gave 50% discount, and we'll be sharing the code for this if you would like to go through these, whether it's the online training from Izaka, the material, or even the exams. You get 50% discount. We'll be sharing that discount with all of you. For the moment, without further ado, our speaker tonight is Caroline McCaffrey, and she's going to take over and do the introduction herself. Go ahead, Caroline, please.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I am going to actually change the screen sharing.
Please do.
I will not be able to, I don't think, see anyone who has a question. So will you be able to help me?
Yes, I'm here for that. No worries. I will just vanish from the video so people can concentrate with you, but I will be in the background. No worries.
Okay, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining. I hope that this presentation is as interesting to you as it was to me. I have been spending the better part of the last 6 months actually putting this presentation together. I've spoken to a lot of experts. So it's a very interesting topic, and also a new way of thinking about how to present cybersecurity to the board. So I will get into it by just talking, about myself, just to give you a little bit of background. My name is Caroline McCaffrey. I am a licensed attorney in the United States. I am licensed to practice in both the state of New York and in California. I have spent the last more than 22 years representing startup technology companies. Over the last decade, I have also focused my practice on data privacy and cybersecurity. I am a certified privacy professional through the IAPP. And then about 5 years ago, I embarked on a new venture with a co-founder who is a cybersecurity expert, and we launched a company called ClearOps. And so ClearOps is focused on representing virtual CISOs. We do think a lot about how we prove the ROI of cybersecurity. And I have a particular soapbox when I talk about ClearOps, and I'm online, and you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. That cybersecurity is not just a cost center. I believe strongly that it is also a revenue generating center. And that's a lot of where this discussion will go into. So to start us off, I'm going to tell you a story. In my first general counsel job, I'll even back up before then. As an attorney who represents startup companies, I was at a law firm where we attended all of the board meetings of our clients. So even before I became a general counsel, I was very comfortable in the boardroom. I sat there, I took minutes, I would sometimes participate, but very rarely as outside counsel. When I went in-house, in my first in-house experience at a company called Sailthrough, that was when I actually had to start thinking about presenting to the board. And the company would spend a significant amount of time putting together a board deck. And the board would quite frequently come back to us with feedback about what they were looking for, what they wanted to see. Over that time, I learned quite a bit about what the board was interested in and what the board was not interested in. You know, when I was the fly in the wall in the board meetings, it was more of an exercise of learning about the different board members' particular expertise. When I was the general counsel and putting together my own slides, it was learning about the business and my colleagues' expertise. So here's the story. I'm sitting at a board meeting as a general counsel, and we go through the typical different departments reporting on each of the updates that they're giving to the board. Sales, who I work very closely with as in-house counsel because I do the commercial contracting and I work with the customer sales teams very closely to make sure we get all these deals across the finish line. The head of sales stands up and does his typical reporting on the potential clients that they have in the pipeline, right? It's that typical V funnel that you will see in a lot of board presentations. And it talks about sales qualified leads moving through the funnel. And then it gets to the point, he gets to the point where he talks about the customers that are in contract. And it says stuck in legal. To which point, one of the board members turns to me and says, Caroline, why are these deals stuck in legal? Now, I'm kind of leading you down a path to make it sound like I was put on the spot, which frankly I was. I don't know that my answer was actually the best looking back on it. I probably should have taken it in a different direction than I did. I probably should have said something to the effect of, well, I'm one person. I don't have the bandwidth to handle 10s, 20 licenses in a very quick and efficient manner. But instead, I was more concerned about my interaction with my colleague. And I think I sort of stumbled through the answer, something to the effect of, oh, you know, it's on them. Like we've sent back comments and we're just waiting for the other side to get back to us, something probably along those lines. Because when you're in a board meeting and the board is asking you questions, you definitely feel the need to prove yourself. And so when it comes to cybersecurity, there's so much that we all know as professionals that the board doesn't know. Most boards, even though this is changing and there's executive orders that are trying to get this to change, at least in the United States, a lot of times a cybersecurity expert is not appointed to the board. We will see sales experts, we'll see marketing experts, we will certainly see financial experts appointed to the board, but we very, very rarely get cybersecurity professionals appointed to the board. So when you are asked to present to the board, what information do you want to show them? I want to talk a little bit about how currently cybersecurity is presented to the board, and then I'm going to talk about what I think should change. Oops. So most cybersecurity professionals will talk about the threat landscape. And what that means, I'm sure you all know what that means. You all are experts here. But generally speaking, it means we say to the board, this company has experienced 1,000 attacks since the last board meeting. I actually, for purposes of this presentation, I thought it might be kind of fun to ask ChatGPT, which is all over the news, at least here in the United States, what does current board reporting look like when it comes to the cybersecurity department? And I want to tell you what ChatGPT said. I was going to show it, but I think it requires too much back and forth. So ChatGPT gave 9 recommendations for how to report cybersecurity to the board. The first one was report on the current threat landscape. The next one was to do a risk assessment of that threat landscape, talk about the existing security measures that are in place, to explain to the board the gaps and the vulnerabilities of the business, to talk about the incident response process, employee training, cyber insurance, compliance, which means regulatory updates, and then to go over the budget and the resources. I argue that most of that is about educating the board. And this is what I think is actually a mistake. I think educating the board is actually a waste of time. And the reason I think it is a waste of time is because I think the board's head is already full of a bunch of numbers. They're thinking about sales, finances, the product. They're thinking about the business as a whole, right? What is the board's responsibility? The board has a fiduciary duty, a duty of care, and a duty of loyalty to the company. They're thinking to themselves, if they're investors in the company, they're thinking to themselves, is this a good investment? And is this company going to make money? Or is it making money? Or is it losing money? That's primarily what they are thinking about. So when you show them a threat landscape map that is full of hundreds and thousands of threats, what are you trying to do? You're trying to educate them, but what they're thinking is this person's trying to make me afraid, and I'm already afraid that this company isn't making money. I actually want to flip the script a little bit. And instead of talking about cost center and the fear of the threats that this company is facing and how you're attacking them, and I'm not saying, let's just be clear, I'm not saying to stop doing that. Absolutely, it is very important that the board is aware of the risks. But what I am trying to say is, let's focus a little bit more on the ROI of cybersecurity. Specifically, that soapbox I was talking about before, about the revenues. So how do you start? I think you start with exactly how the board has just been presented to. Now, I'm assuming a little bit here that this board meeting, the discussion that the board is having, that cybersecurity is sort of at the end of the meeting rather than at the beginning of the meeting. As legal, as I said before, whenever I reported to the board, my slides were certainly near the end, if not always the last slides. And one of the things that I'll kind of backtrack for a second is I think there's a lot of similarity between what legal does and what cybersecurity does. So cybersecurity, you're constantly looking at the threat landscape, what threats are happening to the business, and then you're doing a risk assessment. As the general counsel, all day long, I have people coming up to me and asking me for a minute of my time. And they're asking me questions that have to do with risk. Caroline, I had this situation happen. Can you give me some advice on how to handle it, right? To put that in a context, for example, the head of HR comes up to me and says, Caroline, I need to ask you a question. We have an employee who just came to us and said that they have been feeling uncomfortable around one of their managers. How do you think we should handle this? Right? That's a risk, because what that person is saying to me is, I have a human being who is feeling something, and I have a company that human being could be a threat to or could be an asset to. So how do you handle that difficult situation, right? That's a risk. It's a threat to the company, but it's also a person you're talking about in this particular context. Anyway, my point is, we both deal with constant risks that are being thrown at us every single day. And in addition to that, cybersecurity is tasked with something that is nearly an impossible feat, which is similar to legal. I can't tell you how many times the board has said to me, your job, Caroline, is to make sure we don't get sued. I have literally almost no control over that. The only thing I can do to control that the company doesn't get sued is to have good training of the employees and to create good policies. Otherwise, it's really up to other people in the company to make sure that we, quote unquote, don't get sued. And that's the same thing in cybersecurity. How do you're tasked with making sure that the company isn't attacked, doesn't suffer a security incident. Sure, you can also do the training and the policies, but at the end of the day, one employee clicks on that phishing email and it's all done, right? I mean, there's an incident. So we have very similar I think, positions within the company, which is why I'm taking my own personal philosophy that I used as a general counsel and how I reported to the board, and I'm applying it here. So what I recommend is looking at how you work with other departments within the company. Like I said, the board just literally heard from all of these other departments. When you think of product, how does cybersecurity help the product team? Well, product, what does product do? Product builds cool stuff, right? They like if it's a tech company, they're building some cool tech. Well, cybersecurity works with product to make sure, let's say maybe the OWASP top 10 are being used in their software development lifecycle, right? That's one way that you work with product. How about marketing? Marketing is all about the brand of the company, right? And what's really important for any brand to have? They have to have trust. How are you going to get trust if you don't have good cybersecurity in place? Human resources, you know, I bring up those examples all the time because they're human and they're real, and the stories really resonate. And like I said before, what does human resources do? They support employees. They give and monitor trainings and policies. Well, that's how cybersecurity also works with employees. There's a lot of overlap there. And then finally, I'll get to the one that I'm going to spend a lot more time on, which is sales. What is sales focusing on? They're focusing on customer acquisition. Well, today, you rarely can close a deal without the customer requiring some sort of proof that you have a good cybersecurity program in place. I think we leverage all of the ways that cybersecurity works with every department. And obviously I'm just picking 4 here. There's usually a lot more. But when it comes to the board, these are the departments they're really looking at, in addition to finance. And I think you leverage the work you're doing with them to show the board how cybersecurity impacts the business. So we're talking about boards. They love their graphs and their charts. They love numbers. They love metrics. One of the things that I disagree with about displaying the threat landscape is, in order for a board to appreciate how the threats that are attacking the company could cause the company massive costs, is it's looking at something that might happen and then having to rely on outside of the company data to really have the effect, right? If we suffer a security incident, it's going to cost us 4%, turnover of our annual turnover in fines and regulatory fees. But in addition to that, we may lose stock price. Sorry, was there something?
No, there is a question about it's a great presentation, but there is a question about how we can translate that also into governmental organizations, because sometimes some of the people are working for the government, and the motivations, if I can use that, or let's say the rationale behind it has not to be just money, could be something else. So I'm just relaying a question from the chat.
It's a really good question, not one that I anticipated. I have to sort of sit there and think about it and process it. I would throw back into that. If you are working for the government, then what are the key departments that the government that the board hears from? I think this can apply no matter what, which is look internally, look at your colleagues and what they're doing and how you're supporting them in cybersecurity to find metrics that you can report to the board that show them the ROI of the cybersecurity department, right? So if you're not so much focused on revenues from customers, because it's a government agency that is not focused on that, there is some type of metric that.
Can I maybe help Caroline on that one, because I have a little bit of let's say, experience in this. So when you're working for a government entity, usually the outcome is about having citizens secured or citizen data secured, right? So the main reason we want to have cybersecurity in the government is potentially protecting privacy, making sure ownership is protected because that's part of the governmental wider scope. So it depends on which government agency, but I would say potentially money is also a good differentiator. Pascal, if you would like to, of course, unmute and discuss it further, that's pretty much okay. But I think depending on which government entity, if we are talking about an entity that carries records for ownership of real estate, then the most important thing is that we don't lose that ownership, because if we do, or it's tampered with, at the end the government will have to provide a compensation to the citizens that got impacted. So it's going to be at the end somehow money, unless we're talking about military, and that's a different discussion, and it's more about sovereignty. And I guess that's outside of the discussion of how to talk to the board. Those guys are already security oriented, and they know where to go. Pascal, if you feel like we provided something that would be nice, and I see another question coming from Gilbert saying, Caroline, do you have a method to analyze your organization stakeholders and context? I don't know if that's covered by your presentation, but like, please go ahead. And I hope I was of kind of help.
Yeah, that was very helpful. And actually, it did give me an idea, which is, it sounds like it's more about the brand and the marketing, which I am going to get to. So I wrote it down a note that when I get to that slide, I'm going to talk about the government question. What was the last one you just asked?
It was mainly about how you analyze your stakeholders. So the question is, do you have a method to analyze your organization, stakeholders, and context?
Yep.
My feeling is you have that within your presentation, but I'll leave it up to you.
Yep. And if it's not quite on point to the question, please, whoever asked that, ask further questions. But I will be getting to it for sure. And I love these questions. Even if it takes me a second to process it, I'm going to keep thinking about it, and I will do my best to answer them. So where I was going with this is, the board loves to read these charts and these graphs. When you have to pull out outside data, so things like breach data, how much breaches are costing on average, security incidents are costing on average, vulnerabilities, the threats that are being remediated. When you have to rely on market input, I would say one, you're actually changing your presentation to the board from what your colleagues are doing, because they're not really looking outside, they're looking inside. And two, it's creating a lot of hard work for you. So what's the cybersecurity ROI, the return on the investment? How is the company performing better because of the amount of money it's investing into cybersecurity? So let's talk about the basic calculation. Like I said before, the hard stuff is counting the number of insecurities found, how many got remedied, the potential cost if it's not remedied. Like, we're talking about something that we're saying could have happened. What's easy? And this is where I really want to go with this presentation, which is focusing on sales for a moment, and we'll focus on marketing in a second. But the number of sales deals where the customer asked, do you have an industry standard cybersecurity program? Those are tangible numbers that you can get from inside your own company. So why are you making this hard for yourself? Work together with your sales team to track the new customer sales that are asking for due diligence. That's sales. Marketing, this is to the government question. If the brand trust is the number one most important metric that your company is tracking, how about adding a security page to the website and tracking how many visits it gets per month? Show that you are actually providing value through that marketing page. Just remember to keep it up to date. And this is what I'm going to argue is the key to success with a board, that they really want to see how you're impacting the revenue generating side of the business. Again, I'm not saying to stop telling them about the threats and the risks, to not inform them of other things, but let's show them how you're actually making the company money. And let's include some graphs and some charts. So what information do you need for your slide? And when I was presenting to the board as the attorney, I tried to keep my slides to maybe 2 or 3 slides. There is a lot of debate about how much to present in front of a board. Again, I was mostly on the private side. I have seen public company board meetings as well. But I have a lot more experience on the private side. And on the private side, the request from most of the board is keep it really, really, really tight and short. On the public company side, I will just quickly mention that there are some requirements when you're a public company as to what you have to present to the board. So I'm not going to touch on those. In the United States, we now have incident reporting requirements that you have to do. I guess I am touching on them, but I mean, in this presentation, I'm really, really trying to argue for this slide. It could be more than one, but here's what I recommend you do. You form a really good relationship with sales so that they don't sell you out in the meeting and say that these deals are stuck with cybersecurity department or information security. If you can, which I mean, you're in IT, like there shouldn't be an issue. But get access to the CRM platform. Most companies, large companies use Salesforce, get access to it. There should be a lot of notes in there that can at least give you the data that you need in order to generate your slide. If not, make sure you're close to the team. Maybe it's you yourself who's being pulled in to deals that the customers are asking for security questionnaires, a SOC 2 audit report, anything that has to do with proving that you have an industry standard cybersecurity program. We want to start keeping track of those. How many, the customer's name, did they ask for cybersecurity proof? Did they close? What was the value of the deal? We at least want those 4 data points that we're keeping track of very closely. If it's a quarterly board meeting, you're going to combine the value of all of those deals. All right. And then we're going to say, this is the combined value of the deals where cybersecurity due diligence was an important component. Caveat here. Sometimes cybersecurity kills the deal. We know that's true. Sometimes legal kills the deal. I sometimes had to walk away for points that would not be agreed upon. It's okay. It's okay if that's what happens. However, in cybersecurity, it's very rare that you're going to get the feedback from the potential customer that walked away because they found something in your cybersecurity program that was not good enough. Also very rare for the sales rep who is dealing with that potential customer to get that specific feedback from the customer or potential customer, the prospect, that is why they ended up eventually not choosing your employer for the business. If you can get that, that is great information to have. Again, you have to work with your head of sales to make sure that they are training the reps in asking that question when they lose a deal. I've definitely been on the side of sales reps where they can't even get a prospect who walked away to respond to why the deal was lost. So it's a guessing game. But if you can get it, I highly recommend at least trying. So now you have the value of the deals of the customers who required cybersecurity in order to become customers. Another metric that you want to add in here is renewals. If you're a large enough business, you have a renewals department that is constantly trying to make sure that customers, sign on again. These days, at renewal time, most companies are requiring cybersecurity audits of some kind to show that they've done their due diligence that is now being required by every single state that is passing a new data privacy law. So Virginia, Colorado, Utah, California, New York, they all require cybersecurity due diligence. I know I'm being US centric, but GDPR, Annex 2 of the standard contractual clauses is literally like a security questionnaire. So if you can get that data to add to the value proposition that you're showing, please do. Renewals. Then you want to find out the percentage of the revenue, the value of all the deals during that time frame that's being reported to the board, so that you can get a percentage. You know, was cybersecurity important in 50% of the deals, 75% of the deals? You want to report on both, right? You want to show the value of the deals where cybersecurity was an issue. You want to show the value of all the deals over that period of time, and then you want to show the percentage number. You want to make sure that the slide that you're generating really does tell a story to the board about how much value cybersecurity has added to the revenue side. And I will throw in there that this data is what's going to help you with your budget request, because we all know cybersecurity is not given a big enough budget. Okay, so that's kind of my big pitch to you. I did talk about the marketing side too, which is we can add value to the departments in other ways, such as you can create that security page. I sometimes go back and forth on a security page because if it's not written well, it can become a new source of liability for the company, right? You're promising some type of security. For example, I saw a company that had a security page that said that they were 100% secure. I mean, I nearly fell out of my seat when I saw that. So if your company has a security page and you let marketing deal with it, I highly recommend you get involved. Use it to your advantage. You know, see how much traffic that page is getting in a non-privacy invasive way, and report on it. This is another way to prove that there is an ROI to the cybersecurity team.
Can I intervene here for a second? Maybe that's not a question, but more of an additional point. You know, now, at least in the European Union, there is a lot of third-party risk management exercises that happen. I do think in the US is the same, but I'm not very familiar over there. And there are a lot of public sources of that. So I think it could be also a good idea that companies start managing their public image on these sources. That might be also beneficial to the overall. First, they can get insights from there, and second is in terms of losing deals, because you mentioned that, and that's most important. I'm aware that some companies lose deals because on these indexers they have a bad rating, and they never manage it.
Yes, yeah, very good point. Like, and you're actually sort of furthering my next point, which is if you can Jedi mind trick the other departments to report on cybersecurity for you. I was going to say, you know, a lot of times cybersecurity is not invited into the boardroom. And this is unfortunate, and it's changing, but not fast enough. So building again that relationship with the teams that you know are reporting to the board. So product services, sales, marketing, HR, going to them and, like I said, Jedi mind tricking them into adding cybersecurity somehow into their board materials is another great way to build the infrastructure and the foundation for you to eventually get in front of the board. And one of the things you're just talking about, which is your online reputation, marketing is all over that. They have to be. And brand trust is critical these days. If you go to the head of marketing, and you form a regular cadence of meetings, maybe it's only once a quarter, but you have that meeting where you say to them, do you know what websites, what indexes are giving us poor ratings? You know, they can at least give you the list. You can go check it out, and you can maybe see what's happening that cybersecurity could actually have an impact on in some way, right? So I really do believe when we're talking about board reporting, at the end of the day, it's really about your internal relationships. In order to get there, and I think we all want to get there, having the foundation with your colleagues is just such an important infrastructural step to it. I like to talk about board materials that can be discoverable. So sometimes when you're thinking about reporting all the threats and the security incidents and all those types of things in your board presentation deck, I would keep that in the back of your head, and that's how you can work with legal. So not to push the legal department, but we are helpful in some ways, and certainly helping you when you're talking about a threat landscape. I was on LinkedIn, I think just a couple days ago, and someone was talking about how if you're reporting, one day that you've discovered 1,000 vulnerabilities, and you've remediated a bunch of them, and the next day you find 2,000 more, that's actually a good thing because you're finding them. And sometimes senior executives, boards, they don't realize that's the point, rather than the fact that you're just under more attack. I remember several years ago, I was the victim of a data breach, actually, twice in a row. It was a tax fraud situation. Sorry, I was the victim of tax fraud. And what I learned was that the IRS is hit with some ridiculous number of attacks every single day. And they only had like one cybersecurity person on staff, which was also ridiculous. But my point is that it can be hard for senior executives and the board to be like, well, why aren't you reducing the number of threats? And actually, threats increase over time, the more well we're known, possibly. It's more about the reporting on how much we're able to remediate. That could be very important. But anyway, definitely don't forget that these materials can be discoverable and can be used against you. So, I mean, I think when we're talking about the board and executive management and what we want to report on to them to make sure that we're getting the bandwidth and help, the budget we need, as well as making sure that they're able to perform their duties to the company. These are the slides I recommend. And it's that top one, and I really think I'm going to argue hard that you should lead with it, is what percentage, if it's a company if it's a business that focuses on revenues, what percentage of that revenue was cybersecurity involved in? We have to change the narrative that cybersecurity is just a cost center. And this is literally what I worked hard on doing the entire, 8 years that I was a general counsel, which is I had the same argument for legal. Legal's not just a cost center. We are involved in helping generate revenue. I think this is even more true of cybersecurity today because of that trust factor that happens in the world. This is true of data privacy. I'm a very huge data privacy advocate. And so I just cannot emphasize enough that today a business is dead in the water if they can't get trust. And trust is formed through showing that you're doing the right thing. And that's what cybersecurity professionals do. So I'm arguing for that. I also think that it could be an interesting slide to show the board how cybersecurity is working with the other departments. I don't believe in what that sales leader did to me. I don't think you should sort of sell out someone, your fellow colleague, in a board meeting. I think showing how you're working with the product team and making sure that there's a good software development lifecycle process in place that includes cybersecurity, showing how you're working with the human resources department about trainings and policies, and preventing phishing, for example, from having a successful execution, or talking about how you're working with the marketing team to increase awareness and brand trust. I think these are things the board should be aware of, and I think it's things that they will sit up and pay attention to. Can't get away from talking about the budget. Cybersecurity budget meetings or budget discussions are so much easier when you're showing how much of the revenue it is impacting, as well as how well you're working interdepartment-wise. And then, of course, you still have to talk about the threat landscape. I ChatGPT isn't wrong. We absolutely need to make sure that the board is aware of the risks. That is our job. That is what we all love to do. I just would encourage you to not spend an enormous amount of time looking for external information about what could happen if we suffer a breach or if we suffer an incident, if we are fined by the regulators. Because when you're talking about something in the future versus something that's tangible right in front of, especially a board member, they dismiss it, right? If you're telling me I could lose this customer deal tomorrow and you, board member, could go talk to them and they will then convert into a customer, the board member will be great. That's something I can go do. If you sit there and say to me that if I don't have this software that will help me identify vulnerabilities that then could lead to a breach that then could potentially cost us millions in revenue, you're going to get the, okay, yeah, that could happen, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. And then, of course, if there's a breach, an incident, there is a requirement to report on it. And, you know, I mean, I wasn't brought in here for my legal advice on these particular reports when it comes to breaches and incidents. So I will just say, work with your lawyers on that one because you want to make sure you're being very careful about what you're including in that communication to the board. But clearly the board has to be involved when it comes to an incident. It's not only for the purposes of the company's awareness, but it's also at this point to protect yourself. So I think I'm a little early, but that is my whole presentation for today. Yeah, about 15 minutes early, so I'm hoping that there's a bunch of questions.
Yeah, I think first of all, let me thank you so much. I myself got a lot of tips, and I would like to invite basically everyone. We have a very good amount of audience today. If anyone has a question, a remark, please either unmute and ask directly, or you can go through the chat. I see one tip that was given by Gilbert that he says, I got good feedback from customers at being early in informing them about how we dealt with major vulnerabilities like Log4j and others. Feedback like you are the first to report and we like it. It builds trust. I had a question about maybe lately, as I said, third-party risk management is coming to play in a lot of areas. How do you see that as a selling point for cybersecurity to the board?
Okay. I mean, you're asking a question that is very close to my heart with third-party risk management because it is one of the things that we focus on at ClearOps. And here's my criticism with third-party risk management. If you're a large company and you have thousands of vendors, and I know third-party risk management is a little bit bigger than just vendors, but you have thousands of vendors. Generally speaking, most companies only track the cybersecurity of a small fraction of them that they have determined is critical. I think that is a big issue because what we're seeing, especially today, is most of these attacks are happening through the smaller third parties that you're working with, or they are more in the supply chain. So they're going into fourth party risk, or maybe they're even coming through your customers themselves. So how do you, I think reporting to the board about your TPRM program is necessary, and yet we need to be careful again about the board fatigue in being warned of things that may or may not happen. So, and then the other part of it is also you having to go out and find external data about the risks of third parties, right? There is some data out there, but it's very difficult to really understand. Really hard to get accurate data about the costs of those risks. So when you report to the board about TPRM, I look at it as a financial, almost like talking to your CFO or your head of finance, and going through it in this way of, Here's how many third-party vendors, I'm going to focus on vendors. Here's how many vendors the company has in total. Here's how many are under constant monitoring. There's going to be a gap of who are not constantly being monitored, and that's the risk profile. I think there's some other metrics you can add with it, which is the cost of the vendor. Sorry, I heard there's a question.
No, no worries. We have a couple of good questions actually. So one is about, would there be a difference in reporting to a board of a large company or to a board of a small and medium enterprise? If you can elaborate on that one, because also we have some colleagues that specialize in the SME market when it comes to advisory. I also want to give you another question, because my feeling is they are somehow or going to be somehow interrelated. We have a very nice presentation, but I still find it difficult to get out of the bad reputation of security people. We always spoil the party, cost money, and make things very difficult. I think they are both interconnected. How to present it to large versus small, and how we present it in a way where we don't be the, let's say, the spoiling party team.
Yeah. I love the second question. Okay, let me focus on the first one. Big company versus small company. Like I said, I've been in the private company space for a long time. I worked with very, very small companies all the way to large ones, but mostly on the private side. So the difference I see with the small company, the small boards, is one, you have your CEO, and I do not mean this to be critical, but it might come across critical, but you generally have your CEO being very careful with who they let sit in front of the board. So in these smaller SMEs, I rarely see cybersecurity getting in front of the board. It's almost never. I mean, it's changing, but it is almost never. The larger the business, the more you'll see less of the CEO tightly controlling who gets to sit in front of the board, and realizing that they actually need to open up the board to more executives, more leaders within the company to come in and present to the board meeting. I also see that in the larger companies that the cybersecurity team is called in maybe once a year. It would be great if it was twice. Board frequency of meetings in the smaller versus large. Small, it actually tends to be more frequent and more informal. Large, more formal, less frequent, which is why I see the cybersecurity expert there maybe once a year. If you're only in a board meeting once a year, you have to make sure that you're making a big impact in that one meeting that you're getting to sit in. And that is when I really, really believe you should follow the advice here, which is lead with your strength, lead with how you're impacting revenue. That is something that the boards will love. In the smaller one, where you may not even be getting, again, in front of the board, I'm going to go back to my advice too. Work with your colleagues. The ones who are getting in front of the board, become their friend, schedule some type of regular meeting with them where you're talking to them about how cybersecurity helps them in their department, whether that's sales, marketing, HR, whoever it is that you know has a regular reporting function. I didn't talk about finance that much, other than in the last comment when we talked about TPRM, but that is one of the areas where you really can talk to finance specifically, going to your VP of finance, your CFO, whoever it is, and having the discussion with them about spend, about budgets, right? That's what the finance person reports on, is not just the P&L, but they're also reporting on budgets for each of the departments. So having a good relationship with that person is really going to make an impact on how you get in front of the board. And you can go to that person, and I mean, frankly, in cybersecurity and IT, especially if your IT reports to you, you can tell them how much usage is happening, which is not necessarily your job. But there's interesting things that you can do there with any of the teams that you know are consistently getting in front of the board, where you're having an impact. And that in-person connection to that leader is really, really important. And I'm kind of assuming here that you maybe don't have a close tie to the CEO, but if you do have that, which in smaller companies generally you do have that ability, then it's finding a way to have regular conversations with the CEO about the impact that you're having. And again, that revenue one, how many security questionnaires the company's having to go through, how many times you're having to show that SOC 2 report, how many deals are being won because of your good industry standard cybersecurity controls, or lost because you didn't have cybersecurity enough. These are really great things to talk about. And if there's further questions to that, please let me know. But on the
we do, but
Okay.
I don't want to interrupt you because you were going on a certain stream. But let me also read you a couple of other questions. So when we talk about ROI, do we only talk about money or also time saved for work done, like onboarding new services or access management? That's one of the questions. And we do have a bigger one, so I think we will take that one after this answer.
I mean, I didn't make this point in my presentation, although I had it in my notes, which is, don't speak to the board about what matters to you. Speak to the board about what matters to them. And I'm just going to give it to you straight. What matters to them is the money, right? They think of, when you think of duty of care, duty of loyalty, those are very broad terms. But a lot of times the board is coming in and saying, tell me how the business is doing. Are we making money or losing money? And that's the point that they're going to walk away from. Don't complicate it too much. Like, if you can make an impact, the impact is a very straightforward. We are making this company money because we helped close 15 of the 18 deals that closed this quarter. I hear you on the efficiency and the time savings. It's a good one. It's a hard, I think sometimes a hard metric to track. If it helps you show that you're making this company money, great. If it is hard to show that because you don't know exactly how much time was saved, for example, when I calculate the time it takes to spend, how much time it takes to answer a security questionnaire, I've told people that it takes on average 4 minutes to answer one question due to the fact that you have to absorb it, find the information, write it down, perfect it. Most people don't believe me. So, and then I say, well, in order, I can track that, with this, I can take it down to 2 minutes. That's a 50% savings. A lot of times when you're talking about efficiency, you have to go through a lot of explanation and education. And that's where you lose people. And I think you do lose, especially the board.
Yep, that's a great answer, by the way. We also have another question. I feel it's related to this answer. It says, I want to make sure that the company is operating at the risk tolerance the board members are comfortable with. How do you transfer to the board the knowledge about the level of risk the company is currently taking? That's part of it. And the comment is going, I don't want them to be surprised if something happens. For example, in banks, how do the finance people report the financial risks the bank is taking? That's the full question. My feeling is really related to the last answer, but go ahead, please.
Yeah. Again, I'm not trying to say don't display the risks. That's clearly your responsibility to display, to inform the board of the risks. But I still believe the more you educate, the more you start losing your audience. So there's a balance of, I don't want to harp on the point, but I can't help it. It is the soapbox that I have, which is, if you can say to them, hey, we're losing 15 out of 18 deals this quarter because we don't have industry standard security controls. That speaks for itself. It's like, do what you need to do. Go do, figure it out. It's really hard to say to the board, it's really hard to prove to the board that the cybersecurity program that you have in place is, let me back up. It is a hard road to go down to say, I walked into this company and it's at a high risk position. Here's how we get it to a low risk position, without going into a lot of detail that most of those board members are not going to understand. I would encourage you to reduce the education and just say to them, I have assessed this company on a scale of 1 to 10 at a maturity level of 2. we need to get it to at least a 9 in order for us to close more deals and for our brand to have trust. And just leave it at that.
Yep. We do have a question about how do you look at cybersecurity and the board in the healthcare, such as hospitals, if you have some experience with that. And there was a discussion between the different attendees, but the idea is like it looks on the healthcare, cybersecurity and also information security, I guess they go hand in hand, is not really presented to the board that much. So how do you comment on that?
Flipping to my healthcare, I do have experience in the healthcare industry quite a bit. Obviously, it's highly regulated in the United States, and I think I don't really think it's very different from what I'm arguing today in terms of showing to the board how you are improving the top line. I mean, the healthcare industry is so varied. So, you can talk about hospitals versus physicians versus, there's a lot that's versus tech, that's health tech, that supports this industry. So my head is now going in all those different directions in terms of cybersecurity. But if you're talking about a hospital specifically, they're not the greatest with putting cybersecurity at the forefront. So I'm going to tell you a story. My mother, who passed away about 11 years ago, died from multiple myeloma cancer. She was in and out of hospitals quite a bit. She got to the point where if she walked into a hospital and they didn't give her in the United States, the HIPAA disclosures that talked about her private information, she immediately would turn to me and say something like, "This is not a good hospital because they didn't." So in that context, that trust of your patients goes to your reputation for the hospital. And those are the kind of things where you can actually work with your hospitals. If you're working at a hospital, you can work with their patient care to find out, what kind of disclosures are being made to patients. Have you ever had a patient walk out because not you? Like, how many patients are converting onto our health tech platforms? How many patients get to ask you about their privacy rights? Like, there's definitely ways that you can find out how the hospital's reputation is from talking to your other stakeholders within the business. Again, I'm not advocating here for you to go out and seek external information. I'm advocating for you to work with those people that are your colleagues who have some sort of role where cybersecurity supports them. And it's everywhere. Let's just be honest. It's everywhere in the company.
Yeah, so sorry for your loss. Apologies for that one. I want to say something. I think the takeaways of today is go for internal sources and alignments and maybe allies to formulate the risks a little bit more into a business-oriented presentation. Is that a good takeaway?
100%. Yes. I believe in two things. One, if you can, show how you make revenue. And two, build the foundation, build the infrastructure, work with your colleagues. If you can Jedi mind trick them into reporting on cybersecurity and their board reports, do it. But absolutely use the internal powers you have those meetings with your colleagues, and find out how cybersecurity is impacting their bottom lines. I did want to address one quickly on the bad reputation of the cybersecurity department.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I feel that pain as the lawyer. I am the Department of No. I am the, hey, can I see you? If I send someone a, hey, can I see you email? They're like cowering in the corner. Oh my gosh, I'm in trouble with legal. It's very hard to stomach when you have sort of that bad reputation within the organization. And the way that I have always sort of approached it is to maybe swim against the stereotypes. So, for example, when I was at Sailthrough, we had a security committee, and one of the things that we decided was, people leave their laptops open and logged in. Sometimes the tricks to try and get someone to be trained on not doing that is by sending an embarrassing email to the rest of the company using their open laptop. What we would do is we decided we would close the laptops and flip them over. So when the employee came back, they saw that they had been, they were caught. But there was no embarrassment. There was no sort of punishing. And I think there's a way, if you're working, I'm going to go back to this thing, but if you're working with those colleagues, those heads of departments, you're having these regular meetings, you take some of that fear factor out. And that's how we lose that bad reputation.
That's an excellent tip. And I think it's also an excellent closure to today's webinar. Thank you so much for the very insightful presentation, as well as the great, let's say, answer to most of the questions. And thank you all for attending tonight. We wish you a great evening.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.